Hi there, I'm Jason Bulmahn, Director of Game Design at Paizo and creator of the Pathfinder role-playing game. Today I'm going to talk to you about a topic that is dominating much of my professional life right now, and that's playtesting. Now, for any of you who have played Pathfinder, you know that we've done a lot of playtesting over the years, so I'm kind of well-versed in how playtesting can work in tabletop role-playing games. But many of these philosophies apply to really kind of any sort of tabletop game. Board games, card games, they all kind of playtest in similar ways. Might have some different methodologies, might have different crowd sizes, but ultimately they all kind of function the same way. Playtesting. Why do you do it? What's the point? I mean, we're all brilliant game designers. We all get everything just perfectly right on our first try. Yeah, that's not true. That's not true at all. Playtesting is how you take a decent game, a decent idea, and make it into a great game. It really does all come down to playtesting. Good playtesting can refine your concepts. They can find bugs. They can locate areas where the rules might not be clear, where your own blind spots are making it so that your game is getting in the way of people actually sitting down and having fun. The one thing that I've learned is that every game designer, has certain things that they just don't pick up on. They're blind spots. They're little parts of the game that they take for granted. Where our brains are kind of really good at filling in the blanks. It's like when you see a drawing of a brick wall and they actually only detail a couple of the bricks. Yeah, we do that with game rules too, right? If a game is similar to one we've already played, our brain will just kind of fill in the bits and pieces. Designers are just as vulnerable to this as everybody else, and when you do that, when you create that, if someone else comes to the game and they don't have that knowledge, they don't have those assumptions, they can't necessarily fill in the missing spots, and all of a sudden it's not clear, it's not obvious, and they may not know how to proceed. Playtesting is the way that you're able to look at the game purely based upon the rules that you, as the designer, put into place. If done properly, you can get a fresh look at your game, a look that you can't have anymore. Just here in the office the other day, I was talking to one of our brand new employees, and I found out that she hadn't played Pathfinder at all. And I told her, don't. Please, please, I need you not to play. Desperately. Please, do not touch the game. I'm going to need her eyes, her lack of experience to take a look at it when we are a little bit further down the road, because she doesn't have any of the preconceived notions that the rest of the people who have played do have. Most importantly, playtesting gives you insight and a view that you might not even consider. In this, it's not even about rules. It's just about how people see things, about how people interpret things, about how they understand the written word, the rules construct as it's put together. You might have certain assumptions about how all those words fit together to make your rules, but other people may not have that, and they might find the game confusing, or they might find something totally unclear based on your word choice or rules construction. Playtesting is how you bring all of that together. And of course, it's also how you find all the bugs and things that are actually just wrong and broken and need to be fixed. How do you playtest? And what types of playtest are there? So, at its most basic, you let other players play your game, using only the game to guide their experience, while you are either there taking notes, or recording it, or perhaps later you ask them a lengthy questionnaire or survey. Basically, you need some way to get insight into the game. But the most important part is that other people get a chance to play your game without you kind of telling them how it works. Now, there is actually an early type of playtest that does involve the game designer, and these are early kind of proof of concept playtests. This is where you're kind of slapping together the rules as quickly as possible, and you're not really concerned about having all of the components there, all the pieces even put together. These early proof of concept playtests are really there just to make sure that the game as you envision it, as it is envisioned in your head, actually is fun and works. I think, in my experience, I have done more proof of concept playtesting than almost anything else. This is because you get a lot of ideas and you play around with a lot of them, and many of them don't make it past that point. You go, yeah, that was an interesting idea, I really like this mechanic or that part, but the rest of it isn't quite going to make it. So I'm going to take the piece and maybe use it in something else, or maybe I'm just going to put it on a shelf and revisit it later. That's what proof of concept playtesting will do for you. Once you get out of that, you tend to go into what I like to call component testing. You're fleshing out the game. It's going from a concept into a complete expression, because you're trying to get all the pieces put together. And as you go along, it's good to always get some people together and test the major components as they come together. If you're building a board game and you started out with just kind of a simple hand of cards, but you know you want to turn that into a drafting mechanic, you might proof a concept with the simple hand of cards just to make sure it's fun. But once you got the whole deck and have the whole drafting mechanic, you might want to play it again to see how that works. In a role-playing game, you might go, oh, here's all the feats for characters. That's great. Everybody has 1 feat at every level. Or everybody has a spell at every level. Or everybody's got a cool trick they can do at every point in the game. But as that changes from that to a robust series of options, you're going to want to test that again to make sure that it's doing what you're expecting it to do, that it's getting you to that proof of concept, that it's playing out the way that you think it's supposed to. Once you get all the pieces together, the next thing you tend to do is a lot of stress testing. At this, you start pushing the game to its boundaries. You're looking for the edges and the corners. You're trying to see whether or not the game snaps or breaks, or whether or not it just becomes not fun the further you get to those edges. It's when you want to rein it back. You want to trim away the parts that don't work, or patch them and expand out further. Once you're past the stress testing, generally speaking, you get into bug testing. This is something that a lot of role-playing games and board games don't do too much of, but they do a little bit of. You see this a lot more in video games, where people spend a great deal of time looking for things, little things, that just don't work, or that, because of a rare exception, cause the game to break. I think this happens in board games sometimes, where you end up with a weird board state, and I've had this happen where I'm like, we got to the end and we can't figure out who wins because this one weird thing happened that I'm sure when someone was designing it, they went, there's a 1 in 1,000 chance that'll happen, so let's not worry about it. Well, sometimes that happens. Finally, the last part of testing that I have experience with is blind testing. Blind testing you tend not to do until the very end. It's one of the last tests you do. And in this version, you've got the game. You've got it polished. You've got it relatively complete. You think you know what it is. You package it up in the way that you think it's going to be. You find a group of people who have never played it before. You hand it to them, walk out of the room, and observe them. You just see. Did you do it? Did you make it? So that someone can open this up. They can experience this game from scratch, as intended. And it comes out the way you envisioned. And they don't have any game stops, they don't have any breakdowns, and they can do what the game's designed to do. That's one of the most harrowing tests, generally speaking, because you put so much work into it up to that point. But also, you're close to done. And if they uncover something terrifying, well, you just became not close to done pretty quick. So all of these testing types are kind of done in phases. You actually kind of go through some of them more than once. But the phases focus on different testing types. So you've heard of alpha testing and beta testing and things like that. A lot of these have been picked up by video games and used rather extensively there. For us, we have a similar process. Alpha testing generally is proof of concept testing, component testing, and stress testing. Mostly the first two. That's usually done internally or with a select group of small select group of freelancers or playtesters. Trusted people who can keep the game under wraps and just kind of play with some of the pieces for you. Beta testing is generally much bigger, much broader. That's when you're bringing in a lot of people. And that's where it's really good to start doing some stress testing, some bug testing. You're going to want to do some component testing because you want a lot of people to look at those pieces, because that's where you're going to find your anomalies and your breakout points. That's where you're kind of trying to find all of the borders. And it's really hard to do that with only 50 people or even 100 people. Sometimes you need 1,000. right? You might need a lot of people to kind of rush into a game and try and break its pieces. Now, I know if you're, just designing a card game or a little board game or something, and this is your first time, the thought of getting 1,000 playtesters seems rather daunting. I don't think you have to quite go that big. I think you can take your game to conventions and shows and show it off to people. Count those 4 or 5 person tables. You'd be surprised how quickly you hit 100 or 200. It doesn't take that many sessions to get that high. Finally, after your alpha testing and your beta testing, there's always some final testing that goes on. This is usually the blind testing, really looking at the UI, the user experience, to kind of see how people enjoy the game, see what they take away from it. It's really kind of mostly polish at that point in time. For those of you keeping track of Pathfinder 2nd Edition, the playtest right now is solidly in beta testing. We're nowhere near final testing. That'll be something we do in much later, much closer to the print date. Hopefully it all turns out okay. When you do testing, there's a number of things you want to stress to your playtesters. This is really important. This is something I kind of feel like I sometimes don't do enough of, because it's really hard to do. It's really hard to make sure that your playtesters understand some of the challenges they're about to face. They should have fun. They really should. They should have a good time. But the testing comes first. And that may mean that they have to play things that are not entirely fun. They're there to kind of make sure that the game never ends up in those kind of bad corners, and to figure out where those bad corners are, where you have to kind of push the play into them. That's tricky. You're basically asking people to devote some time to kind of go to the extremes and beyond, and if they approach it with an open mind and the right mindset, they can still have a great time doing that. And they can all kind of stare at it and like, wow, that really busted when we got out to that point and it really didn't work. But that can be fun and enriching out of itself. Finding those broken boundaries and bits is really the best play experience. It's kind of what I'm getting at. But it is really vital. It's really key to making a great game. How do you get the most out of your feedback? So you've put together your playtest process. You've been collecting all this feedback. How do you get the most out of it? It's simpler than it sounds. Record everything. Get as much data as you can about the play testing itself. If you can, record games. We've done plenty of that. But if you can't record every game, make sure you ask a lot of questions. Be there while the game is being played and take notes. Of course, you have to. It takes an iron will to stay over in the corner and not help them when they go wrong. You just have to take notes about what's going wrong. They have to treat you like you're not even there. Use surveys. Those are working out really well for us right now, especially with the larger beta playtests. Those allow you to canvas a large swath of the playtesters and get better overall average data. And they'll show you kind of where opinions going one way, but overall the kind of silent, happy people aren't really complaining too much, and it'll show you different groundwaters, different shifts. We see a lot of that. We also see that it's also a really good way for us to see things that most people aren't grumbling about, but there's still a problem. Being able to tease apart the data and kind of look at where this percentage of people, or mostly people, are just saying, it's okay. I don't know that I want to be satisfied with games that are, they're okay. We should probably be working to make them better. When you're dealing with your playtesters, when you're talking with your playtesters, you really need to train yourself to cut through emotion, to cut through opinion, and to cut through suggestions. Playtesters can get very passionate about what they're doing. And that's a good thing. You want that. You want their passion. That's how they're going to strive to find kind of all the data that you need them to find. You want that. But you also have to understand that they come at it from their point of view, and their point of view is not necessarily to make the best game experience possible. Their point of view might be they really want to see this one tactic really work because they personally find it really fun. It doesn't mean you shouldn't take that into account. It just means you can't sacrifice everything to make one group happy versus another, right? It's just not how it works. You need to be able to look at where they say there is a problem, even though they're not really the best at identifying the problem. Playtesters are really good at identifying symptoms and then extrapolating from those. Sometimes you have to cut into the heart of it and find out where the mechanic is going wrong that leads them to that symptom and to that impression. That's oftentimes one of the hardest parts of this, is kind of cutting through, getting past the, hey, I got a great idea how this one thing could work. Well, when they tell you they got this great idea about how one thing would work, what they're really saying is the thing they're trying to replace has a problem, and they see a better solution. Sometimes they're right. Sometimes they do have a better solution. It's good to be open to that. Frequently, though, they're just identifying a problem, and you may not need to replace the system. You may just need to fix the problem. It goes without saying, but this is also, if you're going to go into playtesting, this is also a challenge. You need to put your own ego aside. You need to put on some armor. Playtesters are going to challenge you. They are going to pick apart everything you've worked on for years in some cases. That's okay, right? It can be tough. It can be really hard. It can be one of the most challenging parts of the entire design process, is just having people come in and saying, well, this doesn't work at all. It's hard. But you can't get defensive. That's kind of the strongest skill you can work up for this part, is you can't get defensive. You have to fight that urge. Because if you start getting defensive about your decisions, then the playtesters stop giving you data. They don't want to have a fight. They just want to tell you what they think is going on. Generally speaking, that's not personal. Although there's been a few times people have gotten personal with their feedback for me. But you have to be able to take that and know where you are wrong and change. You also have to know when you're right and stand your ground. And neither one of those positions are absolute. Because sometimes you'll stand your ground and then decide you need to change. And other times you'll change something and realize that you probably should have stood your ground. But that's the trick. So use that feedback to tackle problems. Use it as inspiration to look at the things in your game that maybe aren't working right and find a way to make them better. Use the feedback to make your game a better game. Necessity is the mother of invention, they say. And playtesters will certainly give you a lot of necessity. That's what they're best at. Well, that's about all I have for this Design Musing. I hope you've been enjoying this series. This marks Design Musing number 8, which means I've been doing this for a whole month. I've really been enjoying it. I hope you have as well. We broke 500 subscribers. I'm still working on getting everybody the new series of my DM tips and advice. You're going to have to wait a little longer for that. I'm still getting some of the bits and pieces put together. It should be a fun series. So like and subscribe if you want to see more, and get out there and make some great games.